Hello, I'm David Van Zummer, and welcome to the first message in this series that I'm starting. We're going to be doing a Bible survey. This is in addition to my normal topical messages that I'll continue to do, but you might be asking yourself, what is a Bible survey? And we will get to that in just a moment. Next few messages, I want to apologize. I only have one arm working, so if there's any glitches in the video or you see some crazy typing, it's because I only have one hand. Had a bike accident the other day and need some shoulder surgery, unfortunately, but I'm okay. But let's get to the real purpose of this message and a Bible survey. So have you ever started reading the Bible? Maybe you started on a reading plan, or maybe you decided, hey, I'm just going to go cover to cover. I'm going to get it done. Thought you were doing pretty good, right? At the start, usually the first week, you did all the reading each day that you were supposed to. But then you get to a complicated book or a boring book, like Numbers maybe. And then you get a little frustrated, a little bored, and you might skip a day. And then before you know it, you might not even be reading the Bible at all anymore. Now, the Bible is or can be a hard book to read, especially if you're just going to sit down and go cover to cover. Why is that? Well, there's 773,692 words in the Bible, approximately. Really depends on which translation that you're reading. Now, why would it vary on the translations? Because you have different methodologies that the translators use. So the NIV is what's called a thought for thought translation. So generally speaking, they take the intent, the thought behind each verse, and they translate that into whatever language they're translating into, whether it's English or Spanish or Russian. Now, and there's also word for word translations, which for the most part try and take this word means banana in Hebrew, so they're going to translate that into banana in English. Now, both of those don't always work all the time. So there'll be sections in both of those types of translations that it's a little bit different. But anyways, that's why the number of words in the Bible can vary. Now, a good-sized novel is going to be about 150,000 to 200,000 words. And then you can take a look at an extreme, for a novel anyways, War and Peace. That tops out at 587,000 words. And then the Lord of the Rings trilogy is around 480,000 words. Now, I haven't read War and Peace, but I have read the Lord of the Rings trilogy and lots of other science fiction and fantasy trilogies. But there definitely did not complete any of those in a weekend. I've read a single large novel in a weekend before. But at 773,692 words, you're just not going to get it done in a weekend. And it's about 1.5 times the length of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So that's just the length makes it difficult. The amount of time that you're going to have to commit to reading it, it's not a weekend, right? But we look at War and Peace and Lord of the Rings, those are written by a single author. I mean, different authors for each one, but each book was written by a single person. And it was presented in a single genre, right? But when we look at the Bible, there's approximately 40 different authors. Again, some of the books in the Bible, it's very clear who wrote it. Some of the books still under a good amount of debate as to who wrote them. And some of them that it's agreed upon, they don't know. We'll say about 40 different authors. And the Bible has about 6 different genres in it: law, history, poetry, wisdom, prophecy, gospels, and letters. And it's not if they just did one book, did one genre. One book can contain several different genres at the same time. So it can make it a little more complicated as you're reading a book, whether it's in the Bible or nonfiction or fiction, that if it was jumping between different genres, right? And why is that important when we're looking at specifically the books of the Bible? Because we'll get into a little bit of hermeneutics. I've mentioned it in past messages. I'm looking to do a series just on hermeneutics and the importance of it. And what that basically is just a methodology, a framework of interpreting the Bible specifically. So why? Why do we care how we interpret the Bible? Well, if we're looking at law, we need to make sure that we apply the same rules consistently, whether it's between two different books in the Old Testament or the Old Testament and the New Testament. We need to consistently be translating and applying to our everyday life each of the different genres. So poetry is going to be applied differently than historical, history or gospels, letters, stuff like that, and prophecy. So it is important to know what genre that we're reading, right? So the Bible survey is really meant to give you a big picture view of the entire Bible. So we'll do that by little pieces. It's just kind of like building a puzzle, right? You have a whole bunch of puzzles. In this case, we have 66 pieces of the puzzle. And we're going to try and give you a big picture so you know how to put those pieces together. So they'll make a little bit more sense. Right? When you are doing a reading plan and you do get to a complicated or a boring book, you know that you still need to put that piece of the puzzle on there and you can see where it fits. And it makes it less boring and hopefully less complicated as well. I want to put a few pieces of information on each book that was going to hopefully help you get into that book, whether you think it's boring or complicated or it's your most fun book, right? We want to give you a big picture, show you how each book fits into the timeline of the Bible and from a subject matter where it really fits in as well. I think it's very important. Like one of the reasons I'm doing this is I've taken several biblical survey classes and they've helped me tremendously. And even though they are big picture overviews of books, I've still learned quite a bit in those survey classes. So a couple things I'm probably not going to do. I'm not going to get very deep into specific scriptures, right? So I'm not going to go line by line by line of each book. I want to give you a brief overview of what's contained in each book, kind of the highlights of it. So I won't be doing that. I'm not going to get into laying out theology. This is how we should be thinking, right? I don't. That's not the intent. I want to give you a big picture. Again, I want you to be able to put the puzzle pieces together for yourself so it makes sense to you, so you're able to apply what you're reading in the Bible to your day-to-day lives. Right? That's the whole key of it. Right? Creating a roadmap. Big picture views, right? Because when we're looking at 773,692 words, that's a lot. And the first thought that comes to my mind with that type of number is, how did the mouse eat the elephant? One bite at a time, right? So it is very important that we spend daily time reading the Bible. Each day we should be reading something on the Bible. It might only be one verse, right? We got to start somewhere. But you're never going to get through all 773,692 words or the 66 books, which is 1,189 chapters or 31,173 verses, unless you start somewhere. So start by reading one verse. You might say, well, what verse do I read? There's an app called the YouVersion Bible app. I use it on a daily basis. And guess what that does? It gives you a one verse each day. You can also subscribe to email lists that will send you a verse in your email if you like to consume it that way. But it's a good way to start a consistent reading plan. I've been just under 700 days straight of reading the daily verse in the YouVersion app. Again, small habits can create bigger habits. Now, the YouVersion also has a significant number of Bible reading plans. Now, a reading plan can span anywhere from cover to cover in 6 months or 12 months, or you can change, how long it takes to read, depending on how many minutes each day you're willing to commit. Right. So I can go from cover to cover to just a 3-day topical reading plan as well. So if you're struggling with a specific thing in your life, go through the topical reading plans in the YouVersion app. I will actually put a link to the YouVersion app in the description of this video. But again, lots and lots of reading plans. I use the Logos app, or Lagos, depending on how you pronounce it. Yet another word that I can't pronounce very, very well. But I use that app for research and content for my messages, but it also has a really good reading plan as well. So again, one bite at a time. Just do one verse a day at the beginning, and then you can build up from there. So what is the kind of information that I will be providing in each of these books? I'm really going to strive to tell you who wrote it, when it was written, why it was written, some key verses, and a summary of what happens. So yes, basically the 5 W's. Who, what, when, where, and why. And why is that important? Because I believe it's going to give you the ability to put each book into context of when it was written, and it'll help you to, again, apply that to your daily life. I've said it before, the most important part of reading the Bible so you can translate it and accurately put it into action is the context, context, context. So hopefully in the next couple weeks and months, I can probably guarantee you there's not going to be 66 messages. Some of the books are pretty short, and they're not going to take me a whole message. I'll combine a few books. So we'll see along this journey how many messages I get through. I'm going to try and keep it to 15 to 20 minutes each message, so it's a little bit easier for you to digest. And again, I'll be doing regular other messages as well that are, unfortunately for you, a little bit more long-winded. But before we get into Genesis, which will be the first book that we cover, I'm going to kind of outline a structure of the Bible and how we can place books into a certain structure. Again, it's all about helping you consume the data in the Bible so you can apply it to your daily lives. So if we look, there's 66 books. Old Testament's got 39, and the New Testament has 27 books. So the structure that we're going to use is the first section is going to be foundational. Now, the books that go into this section, this category, lays the foundation for each of the testaments, kind of giving you an outline of what God is looking for, right? And then beyond that, there's historical section. This is exactly what it says. It's an historical account of the people of Israel living out what the foundational periods books are telling them to do. And how do they know what to do? Well, there's books that fall into an instructional category, right? So the instructional category is the guide that the people in the historical category use to fulfill what God wants them to do out of the foundational category. It all kind of flows together. So what books go into what categories? In the Old Testament, Genesis through Deuteronomy is the foundational section, right? So sometimes you'll hear these 5 books called the Pentateuch or the Law of Moses, which is also a hint of who wrote them. But that kind of lays the foundation for Israel in the Old Testament. The New Testament is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the four Gospels, right? So when we look at the foundation and laying that out for each testament, I think when I think of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, I think of Jesus. We might not always think of Jesus when we think of the Pentateuch, but we should, right? The entire Bible is all about Jesus, because Jesus is the key for us to gain access to life with God for eternity, right? The whole book is about Jesus, right? He was there in the beginning, and he'll be there in the end. So when we look at the historical books, the historical category in the Old Testament, it's Joshua through Esther. I'm not going to read all 12 books out for you. You can take a look at your Bible, but one word of caution. Like I said, different translations, the word count varies. Well, some of those translations order the books differently. There's some translations that might do a chronological order of the books, but traditionally it's going to be Joshua through Esther. And then we go to the New Testament. Makes it pretty easy. Doesn't matter what translation you have, it's always going to be Acts. It's just one historical book in the New Testament. The instructional category in the Old Testament is actually broken out in two subcategories. There's poetical, which is 5 books, and prophetical, which is 17 books. And again, it's important to separate those two because we would take the content of that and apply it differently. Now, in the New Testament, there's 22 books that fall under the instructional, and those are generally the letters that the apostles wrote to specific people or to churches as well. So as a big picture, this is the 3 categories that the Bible is structured into. And as we go in there, I'll make sure to point out which category each of the books goes into. Again, just trying to help you guys get some context and figure out where all the puzzle pieces go and how they interlock together. Another really good big picture thing to take a look at is the timeline of the books. Now, this is the Old Testament books. I only put, for most of these, when the content of what was being discussed began, right? This is not specifically when the book was written, but the content inside that book, when did it actually happen? Now we can see Job is a good example of this. It's generally considered, the content anyway, being the earliest content in the Old Testament, but they're not quite sure when, right? So there's people that believe that Job actually took place before Abraham, which would be, a lot of the stuff in Genesis and the first 5 books. But there's some books that so all these books span a period of time, right? There's not books that just happen in one day, right? But Psalms spans 1,000 years. Proverbs spans just under 200 years or 300 years, and Samuel is about 200 years. So those I did put a range in there. But don't get too hung up on this. Again, this is big picture. I'll have more specific dates of when the content was and when it was written also, which can be a little bit more complicated as well. When we look at the Pentateuch, when it was written wasn't necessarily when it was really created, because back then we have to remember in 1400 BC, it was the knowledge was generally passed down as a verbal passing down. People spoke this out. They memorized it and then spoke it, and that's how they passed it down from generation to generation. Anyways, those are getting down into the weeds, which I'm trying not to do in this Bible survey message. New Testament books, same thing. Some of the books were written about the same time, and the content that it addressed, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. Now, most of these are letters, so they're primarily, the dates here are about when they were written, not historical. So that's how that is. But again, hopefully that gives you some pretty good big picture items that help you put the books into context. So that is pretty much wraps up what I wanted to discuss here in the first message. So looking forward to Genesis in the next message. Thank you. And hey, hit the subscribe button and then hit the bell for the alerting, and then you'll know when the next message comes out for Genesis. Thank you. Have a great day.